We begin this section of 10.1 talking about the positives and negatives of the Industrial Revolution. So if you could find this part that I shared out in the 10.1 note form, we discussed positives and negatives here. So first things that we're going to discuss is obviously that there's a creation of new jobs and there are more jobs, plentiful jobs throughout England and throughout the United States due to the Industrial Revolution. The negative of those jobs would be that women and children start working in large numbers throughout the mills located in all parts of the country, but most specifically where it starts up in New England. On this next slide, you see some pictures here, both photograph and drawing of women who were known as Lowell girls or Lowell women. They are basically employed by Francis Cabot Lowell in his mills in Lowell, Massachusetts, or Waltham. And you can sort of see here, this is a flying shuttle that she's holding here, and these girls are, women are holding the same thing. This is an important component here in the power loom that you see being operated here. Now, when we talk about women working, I always like to show this timetable. So when we think about working, most people think about working 40 hours a week. But if we look here, this is past the Civil War, 1868. You can look a little closer and see that these women are working 66 hours a week at the Merrimack Manufacturing Company. So remember, they do supply a place to live. So basically, you're going to get up and you're going to start eating at 6 o'clock. And to get you up and get you downstairs and get you starting to work, they're going to start ringing the bells at 4:30 in the morning. And then they're going to ring it again 5:30 and 6:20. Now the reason why 6:20 is they're going to give you 10 minutes to get from the boarding house to basically where you're going to start working in the mills at 6:30. That's what commence work means. Then you're going to work up until 12 noon, and they're going to call it dinner. You would call it lunch. You have 45 minutes, and then you're going to start working again at 12:45, and you're going to work all the way up until 6:30 p.m. 6 days a week, as it says, except on Saturday evenings, in which you'll stop at 5 o'clock. That gets us to 66 hours a week. A long work week for people during the American Industrial Revolution. On this next one, you can see actual advertisements that were around at the time period. So here you have the Merrimack Jean Companies and their power looms. And so this is trying to recruit people to come here and work in these mills. Then you have up here, again, December of 1845, factory girls they're looking for. They tell you ages here. You can sort of see this girl's in her teens maybe, working with the various spinning machines here. They're spinning thread. What I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you to stop the presentation here. And I posted this video separate from the presentation here. And this is put out by the Lowell Historical Society. And so that was filmed there, sort of showing the morning routine. And it comes right from a young woman's actual letter home to her mother. So stop it here and then watch that and then join us back. Now, after watching that, this scene should look somewhat familiar because luckily they were able to basically keep the mill as it would be as if you walked in the anywhere from the 1840s, maybe up through the 1870s or 1880s. You see the various belts and pulleys to basically power all of these machines. These are all power looms. So you can sort of see that it just goes on, and you have rows and rows. So this would be a very loud, noisy place. As the video shows you, you'd also have various fibers and stuff floating through the air. So it was a pretty hectic location. And so this is basically a factory floor from the time period. So we now talked about new jobs and women and children working, but now let's talk about new inventions. And that was the one positive thing, that you have new ideas and new inventions coming to the public. And due to them being produced more efficiently, prices drop, and so people are able to actually acquire them. In class, we talk about things like Milton Hershey is always a good example that he does not invent chocolate. What he invented was a way of bringing chocolate to the masses. And so his big thing was to basically bring a 5-cent candy bar. Before that, candy was considered something that you would splurge on. It wasn't considered the average man's snack or any kind of treat, but that's what he did. And the way that he did it is, obviously he's doing it in 1906, so it's many years after the beginning of the revolution, but obviously things are becoming much more efficient and goods are now basically being able to be purchased by large numbers of Americans. The downside of this is, as we saw, is that workers are going to be working long hours in these factories and not for that much pay. That's how these people make a lot of their money. And so it also allows them to invest in other things because their profits are so large. People are working, when we talk about strikes, they go on strike for a 10-hour workday. So that tells you that they're working longer than 10 hours if they want to strike for 10 hours. Today, of course, most people go to work for, 9 hours, and then they get an hour for break for lunch. And so you're working 8 hours a day, 5 days a week for 40 hours. But back here, you're working much longer. You're working Saturdays as well. So moving on to the last part, and that would be something we discussed yesterday with cities growing. And the growth of cities obviously also was positive. It brought new things into smaller places. You got new opportunities. But the downsides of those things we discussed, there are overcrowding in tenements, you have slums, people packed into places, you have the spread of disease, you have sanitation issues, and what we did not talk about was obviously the threat of fire. Threat of fire in cities, because a lot of the structures, of course, are made of wood. There's not, you don't have fire hydrants, you do not have really organized fire fighting teams, and so fire was always a constant threat. Now you combine that with work, and there's a very tragic story of the Triangle Shirtwaist Company's fire in downtown Manhattan. Basically, they occupied the top 3 floors here. Long story short, as a fire breaks out in the bin, there's hundreds and hundreds of employees that are there. It's pretty much a sweatshop. A lot of them are immigrants. Some of them don't speak English very well. And what happens is fire escapes are not very well designed. There's no sprinklers, and so many women are overcome by the heat and flames and the smoke, and 154 of them lose their lives. So it was very sad and tragic, but what it did is bring fire codes to the forefront of what has to happen in commercial businesses. The other one that I want to share with you is not a work-related one, but it's a famous fire in Chicago. In 1871, the Great Chicago Fire, you can look it up. It basically burned a third of the city. It ravaged the city for 2 days. It jumped the Chicago River. It was one of the worst fires in all of American history. So these things were very important at the time. Now, as we go back and to the last thing here is I want you to stop the presentation here, and I want you to basically watch this video that I've posted about this man known as Lewis Hine, who was basically able to, through his photographs, bring about social change in the end of child labor in America. And so he does that through the power of his photography, to tell the story, to show it to the American public what was happening. And it basically galvanized Americans to stop this practice. So make sure that you watch this, and then what I want you to do next, and this is sort of homework, is I want you to think. What's the most powerful picture that you've seen recently? Think about in the last week, the last month, the last several months. Find it, make a copy of it, be ready to share it, and be ready, more importantly, to explain why it matters, why it's powerful. And so we'll end here with the end of 10-1.